Red and blue team relitigation of well-established science is not a new idea. It's been in vogue recently. Professor Stephen Koonin at NYU has made a number of statements recently calling for such a reassessment of well-established climate science. But it's not new. This was tried back in 2014. So back in 2014, the American Physical Society, APS, was charged with reevaluating their 2007 position statement on climate change. And in order to do that reevaluation of their formal society position statement, they decided to set up a red team, blue team process. And Professor Koonin was in charge of that process, of the subcommittee of the American Physical Society's Public Affairs Committee that was charged with this update. So in the American Physical Society's red team, blue team process, there were 3 red team members, Dick Lindzen, John Christie, and Judy Curry, and 3 blue team members, Isaac Held from the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab, Bill Collins from UC Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and me. And we met at NYU in January of 2014, and it was quite extraordinary. Each of the 6 scientists had a half an hour to present their case, as it were, the evidence for a substantial human effect on climate and the evidence for credibility of climate models and some confidence in model projections of future climate change, and the evidence against a substantial human effect on climate, credibility of climate models, et cetera, et cetera. After each 30-minute presentation, I think there were 15 minutes when the members of the American Physical Society's committee could question the speaker. And then at the end, there was a kind of wrap-up with 2 hours of general discussion. There were somewhere in the vicinity of a dozen plus committee members from the American Physical Society in attendance, a few other observers, and Stephen Koonin and the 6 scientists. I did not think that the red team arguments were successful. As we discussed before, for example, John Christie showed this figure A not equal to B and was asked by one of the physicists in the room, well, why? Why, Professor Christie, what's going on? How do you explain this divergence in warming rates between the models and the observations? What's going on there? And John Christie shrugged his shoulders and said, Mother Nature's gonna do what Mother Nature's gonna do. That was his answer to a scientific question. Why? What's going on? How do you understand this? And it became obvious, I think, in that moment to all of the people in the room, John Christie was not interested in understanding the why. Why are there these differences in warming rate in the early 21st century that really aren't there in the late 20th century? What's going on? That's where the science is. That's what you want to know, the why, the understanding. And his answer to that question was, Mother Nature's going to do what Mother Nature's going to do. He made no attempt to provide an explanation as to what he thought physically was going on there. And that was telling. I think that the physicists in the room, the observers, the committee members, you could see them puzzled. Here he's showing this fundamental divergence, or claiming to show this fundamental divergence between simulations and observations, but he has no explanation for the why. He's not trying to understand it. How can that be? How, you know? The other telling moment for me came near the end of the day in the wrap-up session. Professor Koonin wanted to try and find the common ground, the things that the 6 climate scientists could agree on. And he started off by asking whether all 6 climate scientists, red team and blue team, could agree that atmospheric CO2 had increased by about 40% since the Industrial Revolution. We could all agree on that. His second question was, can we all agree on the isotopic data, the measurements of lighter and heavier isotopes of carbon? It's that data that tells us that about 75% of the increase in atmospheric CO2 since the Industrial Revolution is due to human-caused fossil fuel burning. 5 hands went up. 5 could agree with that well-tested science. Of course, those isotopic measurements have been made by labs around the world. You know, it's very, very well-established science. But John Christie did not agree. And when Professor Coonan asked him, well, why don't you agree? John Christie said, because I did not make the measurements myself. And again, you could sort of see the amazement in the room. The import of that statement is that I am not going to trust anyone else, no measurements unless I've made them myself. So the red team lost. The red team was not convincing to the members of the American Physical Society. Steve Coonan stepped down as chair of this subcommittee charged with updating the statement, and now he's calling for the same red team, blue team process, even though the process that he presided over did not yield a result that he liked, that he was comfortable with.